Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Powering Up Your 2025 Marketing Strategy. I'm joined by a selection of panelists today to talk about reflections on 2024 and looking towards 2025. First, I'm going to go through some housekeeping and run through an overview of today's webinar. So we've estimated that the webinar will last between 45 minutes and 60 minutes. Attendees' microphones are muted. If you can ask questions using your question box on your screen, and what we'll do is we'll follow up after the session with any questions that you had with any answers. So today we're going to meet the panel. So we'll do an introduction and people will give a bit of an overview of their marketing background and their background in general. We'll reflect on 2024 and then look at those challenges and opportunities in 2025 and go through a selection of topics as well. So for our panel, I'm Izzy Herrera, Head of Marketing at MBS, and joining me is Lee Jones, Liam Bateman, Hannah Strong, Matt Hicks and Nick Gray. So I'll hand over to you guys to do a bit of an introduction as to who you are and where you work. Lee, if you want to go first.
Yep. Hi, everybody. I'm Lee Jones. I am the Head of Sustainability for Hebexo. Hebexo are an international technology business. And in the UK, our brands include the MBS products and also Glenigan and the Construction Information Service. So part of the MBS family, extended family. My role typically involves one, making sure that the Hebexo businesses operate sustainably and are compliant with any environmental, social and governance laws, but also involved in the development of the platforms from an ESG perspective. I think the reason I've been invited along to this today is that there's a large focus in terms of marketing, on terms of ESG and products, services, whatever it is that people are doing. So yeah, that's me, 25 years in the industry, and hopefully I've got answer to some of the questions that might be being asked today.
Thank you, Lee. Liam, did you want to go next?
Yes, hi, I'm Liam Bateman. I'm Managing Director of an agency called The Think Tank. We're a full-service marketing agency specialising in B2B, but for 31 years we've been specialists within the construction sector, clients across all parts of the sector, both in the UK and across Europe, providing a complete range of services from digital PR, event, you name it, we kind of do it. So yeah, there's The Think Tank, and I'm Liam.
Thanks, Liam. Hannah, did you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Hannah Strong. I'm a PPC manager at Squidgy. We're a digital marketing agency based in Newcastle, and we specialise in SEO, PPC, and paid social. Personally, I've got 10 years experience managing Google ads, LinkedIn ads. I've been working with MBS for the last 3 years, supporting them. And yeah, thrilled to be here to add the kind of digital angle to today's opportunities.
Thanks, Hannah. Matt, you're up next.
Hi, everyone. I'm Matt. I'm Strategy Director at Lesniak Swan. We're a specialist B2B agency. Construction's a big specialist sector for us. So we work with clients in the UK and around the world on campaigns. The likes of Genuit Group, a few businesses there, a few in the ETEX Group as well, for example. My background's in construction for about, longer than I care to remember. I had even more hair than in that picture then when I started out, believe it or not. Working in insulation, building chemicals, and those brands I've mentioned today. So yeah, we specialise in campaigns fully integrated from strategy right the way through to activation, creative, PR, you name it.
Thanks, Matt. And Nick?
Yeah, hi everybody. My name's Nick Gray and I'm the Business Development Manager at Powermatic. I've been involved at Powermatic for about 4 years now, and we are a HVAC solutions provider into the construction world, into the commercial and industrial sector. So HVAC is heating, ventilation and air conditioning. And I think I've been invited along today because we've got quite an interesting story and relationship with MBS. We've been on a really interesting journey over the last couple of years, and hopefully I can share some of the insights into that today as well.
Great, thank you. So moving into our panel Q&A. So our first question that we've got coming up is reflecting on 2024. So I think this would be really good for everybody to give their perspective on it. So from your perspective, what were the biggest marketing challenges and opportunities, and how can these lessons inform strategies for 2025?
Will I kick off on that one?
Yeah.
Yeah, certainly. So I think one thing is looking at the broader B2B market and also then the construction market. I think the big changes in how people are purchasing. I think a recent Sixth Sense study looked at it and said that B2B buyers are nearly 70% of their purchasing process before they engage with a seller. So there's an element there of ensuring that you've got that strong brand awareness and digital shop window, and making sure it's easily discoverable via search, etc., right from the beginning. In addition from that, 80% of the buyers have a preferred vendor before they make first contact. So again, engaging comprehensive demand generation and bringing those two elements together as something that's going to help to address that challenge of your audiences already having made part of their decision as they go to look for a supplier. But then from a construction specific angle, Glenigan's construction industry biannual forecast for UK and Ireland came out last week. And okay, we've got macroeconomic uncertainty persisting despite the forecast of gradual improvement. But everyone knows there's been a sluggish market, delayed decisions and pipeline slowdown. But anecdotally, looking at the marketing element from this, is there was a strong preference for in-person interactions and also trust building channels such as NBS Source. From a psychology point of view, when people are fearful, they go to those that they can trust. So from a marketing perspective, it's all about developing the awareness and perceptions that demonstrate expertise, knowledge and experience to overcome those trust issues, using mix of channels that's going to get closer to your audience, combining challenges such as digital with face-to-face, using events, using other various opportunities, and looking at things like NBS Source as well.
That's great. Thanks, Liam.
Izzy, I can maybe jump in here, just following off the back of what Liam's just said about the 70% of the decision making is done prior to the engagement. I think that pushes the digital aspect quite a lot. If for construction projects in particular, and particularly if these things are involving sustainability or building safety, for example, there's a lot of data points that people need to cover to making sure that, one, things that they're specifying meet regulation, they're safe to use, or they've got low impact if they're looking at it from an ESG point of view. One of the things we've been doing across the group is trying to help construction product manufacturers to actually get that information in a structured format. The ones that are doing it are really leveraging it now. But I think for those that haven't considered this to begin with, particularly with the sustainability information, is to try and get that within your agenda to push for next year. If people are looking at this stuff in the background and then they're comparing products, comparing systems, whatever it is that they're doing, there's a good chance that they may have written you off before they've even had the opportunity to speak to you. Now, it's not the case that the people that aren't displaying this information might not have it. They could do, they just might not be displaying it correctly and in a structured format or in the right place. So yeah, I think for me that would be the sort of go-to point off that information. If people are doing 70% of the work digitally online, looking at the catalogs, looking at sites such as NBS Source, etc., is make sure that you've got as much as you can there readily available for people to access.
I think. Go on, Nick.
I was just going to say some sort of real world examples, if you like, of what you've just said, Lee, is that I can think off the top of my head two building services consultants that we have been and are targeting, who just won't entertain a conversation with you unless you have that data, particularly in this instance. EPDs is what I'm thinking about. So it's absolutely critical, particularly for sort of my role, is that if you haven't got the product information in the right place, it's a non-starter. It really is.
I think that operative word is, Liam had mentioned it, that if you've not got that source of truth, the manufacturer is in a very enviable position to ensure that, although it takes a lot of work. Arguably, a lot of your marcoms, you're rolling something unmentionable in glitter, aren't you, really? You've got to make sure that what's underpinning it is right, because the the ship's been rocking a bit in construction, certainly longer than a few years, really, and we're still working out the ramifications of some of those things on, on the back of the Building Safety Act and things. So it's about making sure what's underpinning here is very clear, well, accurate, dependable communication. Yes, marcoms are important and finding ways to engage in people, which I guess we'll come on to later, but making sure that you've got those basics right. I've noticed something that I think there's been some recent quite high profile signups as the CCPI. I think Robert McAlpine has signed up recently. So that's an interesting signal that that this is only going to become more important in 2025.
Yeah. I really agree on the third party certification. We've been like one source. That's like one of our selling points, is the fact that you can showcase these certificates. And this year we've launched a new feature, which for any of our partners who are third party certification bodies, if they're a partner of MBS, they'll get their own landing page, and then they've got a section where all of their products are now showcased. But we've had like feedback from a specifier's perspective, like they're homing in on these third party certifications because they want to feel confident, especially the CPPI, the Code for Construction Product Information. We've recently partnered with them, and that launch has gone really well. And also the fact that they've now got a section on source where they, specifier can go and see all of the products that have got that certification. We had a speaker at one of our events, one of our architectural practices customers, who again reiterated how the code, like that's something they're actively looking for now, because of the instant kind of reassurance that it gives them. So yeah, it seems to be getting a much bigger space. So that'll be very interesting for 2025.
There's an extra layer there as well from some of the, without breaking any confidences on some customer research we've done over the year, but a lot of people that are involved in the purchase of building products have people in sustainability and health and safety, generally ESG roles, forming part of that decision-making unit and that specification team. So whilst they might not be specialists, they've got extra criteria they need to meet to be able to choose and specify something in a given design. So there's a complexity in terms of how products are specified that's that again underpins that need for trust and that information you're talking about, Izzy.
I think that's the same for what we're seeing from a Google perspective too. There's only more and more competition out there than previous, and that does increase every year. So I think the challenge for the brands is to make sure their USPs are at the forefront of what they're saying. Because yes, there's going to be like a certain standard that everyone needs to abide to now, which is great to kind of give that instant trust. But then it's like, why are you better than the competition? It's making that extra bit stand out, and then making sure your message is consistent across all channels. Because I think there's extra pressure on marketers to be everywhere across every platform, across every channel, to have be consistent across, and that consistent message across every channel. So, but there's only so much time, so much team resource, so much budget. So it's like, how do you maximize that? But you have to really play into it. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we've seen the last year, is that, with the demise of Twitter and X and, the rise of AI, there's so many more tools and technologies out there now to reach your audiences, which is great. But then there's only so much time and money and space to do that. So it's really prioritizing the reassurance, and then adding your USPs and whatever makes you to the competition ultimately to succeed next year.
I'll add a bit more to that as well, if I just may. I think there's a foundation or an undertone, if you like, here to this conversation. For me, it's that although things can very happily be done digitally online, I understand the platform that we're talking about today. But actually, for me, nothing is transactional. It's all about relationships and that trust word again that you mentioned. So I think there's more happening in a very uncertain kind of economic climate as well. And I refer to the fallout of Grenfell. I refer to the new UK net zero standard that people are beginning to talk about more meaningfully. The changes for us, the changes to sort of the approved documents where U values and air permeability are really, really important for these buildings to achieve passive house standards or high BREEAM ratings. So actually, it's kind of this whole plethora of information that people need, and for that specification to be absolutely on point, for me, it always takes relationships, and it always takes that trust element within a number of relationships to be able to successfully fulfill that. So you have to remove the transaction element, but in the same breath, make it as absolutely painless for whoever's attempting to build that specification at the same time.
I think that's one of the benefits of MBS Source as well that we're doing there. I mean, myself personally, I was on the digital working group for the CCPI when it was being developed, and a lot of what we've done in MBS Source, the sort of methodology was aligned to that same thing. So clear, structured sectional data, parameters that were in the same order, regardless of whatever product you were looking at. So you could be a specifier looking at glazing, or if you're doing a fenestration specification, then moving to the building envelope and looking at insulation, cladding materials, etc. And the data would all be structured, so you would not have to start looking at different things. It really is like you say, Nick, the pain point is just making it as easy for people to access the information, but then making sure that that's credible as well, that's behind it too.
I think there's opportunity. I mean, we're talking about that as a challenge, but from the point of view, we've got a few clients in the fire stopping, fire protection space, and it's positive for them in that people want to understand how to talk specifically about building safety, perhaps adjacent to sustainability, but people want to understand how they can meet these new higher standards. The manufacturer is very well placed to be offering that advice and that support and become an expert in the industry. So there's certainly opportunities here for brands to add some value without treading too far into marketing jargon in terms of how they can get their technical experts out there, get them on site, get them talk to people designing buildings, and get involved. It's a good way to build that relationship.
Yeah, I think like sort of like leans into your thought leadership topics and making sure you're picking ones that resonate with your audience, but also that you actually have the authority in. And if you have got, if you have got that authority and it resonates with your audience, you're on to kind of like a winning topic to discuss. I guess to like kind of wrap up this question, I think kind of leaning on to what Hannah said from a marketing point of view, one of the key things I think from this year from me is about that there is so many opportunities, there's so many, in a way, so many opportunities, so many platforms, so much things that you could be covering. And I think for 2025, it's like taking, this year there's just like things popping up all of the time, or, things changing in the landscape of which platforms you should be on and which channels you should be using. So next year is looking at, well, where is actually your audience? You need to really then home in more so on where your audience is hanging out. How do they respond to you? And what do they like? Because otherwise you could end up spreading yourself way too thinly, and even in a place that isn't actually relevant to who you're targeting. I think that's something that I'm going to carry into 2025, is remembering that, because you can get a bit overwhelmed with all these different things coming out all the time. Cool. So our next question that we've got, I'll just bring it up on screen, is about resonating with specifiers. So I think it might be kind of carrying on from some of the conversations that we've already been having. How can manufacturers effectively incorporate sustainability and regulatory compliance, for example, building safety, EPDs, into their marketing strategies?
I think it's back to that point about the manufacturer being the expert here, and that you've got to do it honestly, so that I think gladly in most cases we're past greenwashing in most marketers' case. We've got to be careful there that again we're honest and truthful in what we're communicating. But the more you can focus on these as assets that can help position and engage customers as much as inform from a technical point of view, the better really. They're tremendously powerful, and that's not to suggest you gate them or anything like that. You make them available. But the broader you can help to promote those through thought leadership, as you were saying, Izzy, their ideal basis content for getting out that more informed, technical, expert view through your marcoms.
I think it links back to the trust point as well, doesn't it, that Nick mentioned in the last question. If you've got something such as a safety certificate or an EPD, which for anybody that's not aware of what they are, environmental product declarations, a third party has conducted that audit, that analysis of your product, of your manufacturing processes, etc. So any claims that you make can't be perceived as greenwashing as long as you are sticking to those exact claims and the data that's verified behind it. And I think that's what's going to be used. We did some research beginning of last year and launched at the end of last year and launched the Sustainable Futures Report at the beginning of this year from it in the UK. EPDs were ranked quite highly in that. And I think, Izzy, that's still free to download, I think, isn't it, on the mbs.com if people wanted to take a look at it. There's quite a good number of data points within there as what specifiers are looking for. So if you were a manufacturer or a supplier, it will sort of highlight what the priorities are. EPDs being one of them, but then what is a priority within an EPD? Because things like that, they're mandated data points within them that you have to submit to obtain the certification, but not all of it is mandatory. So we've asked specifiers what sort of data points are there. So things like embodied carbon, which is the cradle to gate emissions from your product itself. The preference of those. So yeah, it's definitely worth looking at, but it's going to help you inform what other communication you're doing as well. But just a bit of caveat, it can take some time to get them. So whether that's part of the marketing communication for next year or whether that's something that's building on it ready for the following year, it's just something to bear in mind.
Another thing on that report, oh, sorry, Nick.
All I was going to say is I think from our perspective as ultimately a manufacturer at the end of the day, there's always that natural prioritization, because it's easy from me in my role as business development to say we need a bulletproof EPD for every single product in our portfolio. Ultimately, our portfolio is sort of this broad, and therefore reality is you can't go from 0 to 100 within a week or so. So it's about prioritizing, and I guess that's when it becomes commercialized to a certain extent, is how do you prioritize what's required and accept that if you're going from 0, that some of your products aren't going to meet that requirement, but you have to be on this journey. I said it at the beginning of this webinar, I think you have to go on that journey. It's continuously progressing to get that data, and I suspect we'll always be chasing the market because the market's moving, the whole landscape's moving, and at pace, I would argue, at the moment, and that's okay, but it's our role as manufacturers to at least attempt to keep up with that, I think.
We saw similar patterns with the bin mandates back in 2016 when manufacturers were being pushed for digital objects, and that there was some sort of arguments for and against the actual demand for them. But ultimately it was coming, and I think now things like Revit, ArchiCAD, etc. have become the norm, and manufacturers just expected to have these if they've got tangible sort of products. But going back to what you just said, Nick, about not being able to go from 0 to 100, it's prioritizing which ones do you do. So go for the key parts that you know are specified and get them done as a priority. And I think the marketing data that goes associated with that, whether it is a 3D object, that could be one of the marketing strategies that you have for next year, or whether it's actual contextual data, is focus on the priority products with those first. Don't expect to just have everything out of the box.
There's a real convenience factor around those BIM objects and that kind of thing that we see, that a lot of architects are happy to use. Again, back to the point of a manufacturer being helpful, if the manufacturer has supplied those objects that they can use for convenience, because let's face it, you might be one of hundreds and hundreds of different points of specification they're doing, then your brand's the one that sticks in mind. Your brand's the one they're going to go to use those objects next time round. So it becomes quite a virtuous circle. Something that seems quite small can have quite a big impact on preference in specification.
The other thing to mention on this is don't get drawn into using AI to generate considerable amount of content around some of these topics. Don't get drawn into that. You will be found out when you're looking at using those sort of tools sometimes. And I think it's very important, if you're going to put material out there, to be unique. Do it with proprietary data if you have it. If you haven't, go and find some proprietary data that you can research and pull that, and give your audience something tangible to listen or read, rather than just writing something for the sake of writing it and putting that out into the marketplace. Do make sure that it has validity, because you're going to be found out otherwise.
I just wanted to raise a point on kind of future proofing. Obviously, if people are, your target audience are sourcing the information from your website, great, or third parties like MBS, then great. But quite often when people turn to Google, there might be a point in time where Google start introducing their own regulatory standards. So we've already seen this within the financial services industry. If you're a financial services provider or like a mortgage broker or a bank advertising on Google, you need to supply extra verification information to say you are who you say you are a trusted body, you are monitored and regulated by the compliance bodies. And given that there's lives at risk in this industry, it might not be too far away before Google says, right, you need to have X, Y, and Z compliances before you can advertise on the platform. And if you're not there meeting the standards and all your competitors are, then you could have fallen at the first hurdle. So I can't speak for Google, obviously don't know what's coming down the road, but it wouldn't surprise me in the future if there was more regulation around what they expect advertisers to provide in order to get in front of people on Google Ads, and same with Bing and other search engines.
That's possibly where AI will help those sort of platforms as well, Hannah, isn't it? Where they can actually deploy it to actually check. So it's if you've obviously got thousands of different providers of information on these platforms, then if artificial intelligence can actually verify things for them, it's probably going to come quicker than we may expect. I would have thought. It's
absolutely, yeah. Stuff like Perplexity, they'll be looking at for those trust signals, won't they? Like the badges, backlinks potentially saying, accredited by X, Y, and Z. They'll be skimming your website for those signals. You are who you say you are, and you are regulated, and you're meeting exceeding standards. So yeah, absolutely. I don't think it would be out of the question sooner than we think.
That's really interesting. Has anybody got anything else to add on this one before we move on to the next question?
I think all I would add is that I will say, picking up on Lee's point about BIM models, it's actually quite relevant. And again, the journey we've been on is, if you take the example that we created some BIM models many years ago, and then we revisited them when we knew that we'd have to update them to include the likes of EPDs and more sustainability information. And at that point, you realize that your BIM model isn't to the quality that it really needs to be to support these people, these end users, these clients, whoever they are that we're talking about today. So actually, my point is, I think any advice to any other manufacturers who are just starting out on the journey that we've been on would be actually spend some time strategically designing and considering the BIM models that you're generating, because they can house, in my experience, an awful lot of the data that we're talking about here. And if you don't have it, what it might do is just cue you or drive you to create it in the first instance before you can go about building what can be relatively expensive BIM models. They're hugely powerful, but they're only as good as the quality that's built around them, in my experience. So there's something to think about as a sort of tangential element to this today, I think.
Thank you. So looking to 2025, what key marketing trends or technologies should construction product manufacturers be leveraging in 2025 to stay competitive and stand out? Who wants to go first?
Well, I would follow on from the conversation we just had around Google. I think one of the key things that we're advising our clients on is looking at AI optimization for their websites, using things like schema.org to sort of structure product pages for that, improving their AI search rankings. But one other element that we're working with considerably now is this personalization versus broad reach in the market. As we all know, the cookies have restricted the data that we have now about interactions with our websites and who is looking at our products, etc. That's a real challenge. So we're moving much more to a focus upon IP lookups and intent platforms, identifying those companies that are in market for your products or interacting with your information. And that's giving you much highly targeted information around the organizations that may be interested, and then looking at the data around the buying committee that Matt mentioned earlier, looking at that wider audience within the organization that you can influence. So taking those intent signals, then revealing data matched to those organizations that are looking at your search terms based upon your personas and the personas of your wider buying committee within your target audiences. And using that data to then market out to, so using email, using LinkedIn, etc., to reach out to those organizations that are in market. And this again, working with other platforms such as MBS Source, where you can see the interactions with your profiles on there, taking that data into other platforms as well and building that out so that you've got that intent element happening and continuing to reach out to those audiences with your thought leadership and with advertising, whatever else that might be, through other platforms is a really key driver at the moment. It's becoming it's not targeted to the individual that we all used to buy as such, because you're looking at companies that have interest in your products and services. But then it's about the data that you can source for those companies to then, or whether through targeting that company in LinkedIn, or whether you purchase data and target through email, etc. So that's a really big thing that is happening quite broadly across a lot of B2B markets, and specifically within construction as well.
I think to follow on from that, from a LinkedIn perspective. So I think when people think of LinkedIn advertising, often people think it can be quite expensive, but there's ways and means around reaching your audience. Well, it depends on the kind of KPIs really. So if you wanted to use, say, if you haven't got that relationship with them and you wanted to hit them with a bespoke message, like invites to webinars and more gate kept content that's going to really solidify your expertise. That's where, like, in mails that are relatively cheap to send, you only pay when someone opens the email, and it's 20, 50p. It's not expensive at all. When people think the cost per click on LinkedIn can often be £2 up to £15, £16, depending on how many other people are trying to target that person. But if they're in a senior role, or they're director, if they're a decision maker, there's a lot of people already trying to get in touch with that person. So that's how it can be expensive. But so from LinkedIn, it's great. But carrying on from that kind of job title industry targeting that you can do, a lot of companies do underutilize another channel, which is Microsoft ads. Now, it's often referred to as Google's kind of poor cousin, but the audience targeting is actually, I think for B2B, for construction and manufacturing, way better on Microsoft than it is on Google, because to Liam's point around in-market audiences, yes, you can target those on both platforms, on Google and on Microsoft, but because Microsoft owns LinkedIn, you can target and prospect to people based on their job title if they use that same profile on LinkedIn. So it's a huge opportunity. So if you've got a bank of data that you've acquired or purchased, however, or you're running LinkedIn ads, or you know exactly who your target market is, by their industry, by their job title, you can duplicate that on Microsoft and really advance, open up your audience targeting, using Microsoft for a fraction of the price, because it's obviously lower search demand, but also the cost per clicks are a lot cheaper. So it's massively underutilized. So I think that could be, but it is actually, the uptake of Bing and Microsoft is on the rise because of their AI functionality. So a lot more people are using Microsoft than they were previously. So it could be them snapping at Google's heels.
I think alongside the intent stuff and around people that are in market, the general marketing practice of memorability and making sure that brands are liked and aware and top of mind is really, really important. There's lots of great thinking from people like Jenny Romaniuk and the Ehrenberg Bass Institute around distinctiveness. And a lot of the focus previously is on the consumer side, but that needing to stand out in some way, and we call it mental availability, so an association of the brand with a particular need or category, is really, really important in this market as well. We shouldn't underestimate the power of making sure you have a good level of mental availability. because who chooses a brand, a product brand in construction can vary from project to project and from product to product. So we'd like to think that the specifier might be able to make a branded spec, but a lot of the time they won't. It might then be the contractor, it might even be the installer, it could be a project manager on site, it could be any number of people. So making sure that, yes, you're looking after that design and specification process, but also that you're looking after where that product is going to be bought, which could be a person in a completely different business. That often links back to memorability and mental availability, that you're able to then make sure, and I think we're going to get on to brand and demand in a minute, but using techniques such as distinctive brand assets, being generally distinctive in your communications is really, really important. And you'll find that that actually is rocket fuel for the efficiency for this great digital stuff that Hannah and Liam have been talking about too. You're going to get better results later down the journey if you're investing in that awareness activity too.
I think tracking it as well is probably worth noting when you are engaging in activities like that. I mean, obviously, MBS Source has had analytics for a long time for people over this. It's been specified, so you can track what products of yours are doing well, which ones are going into actual projects, etc. But going back to what Matt's just said about the procurement route and then who's responsible for actually doing the purchasing, having the link to Glenigan that we've now got, which it still surprises me how many of our manufacturer customers with MBS don't realise you can actually link that account to Glenigan to then follow through and see who actually is responsible for the procurement side of it. Just managing that relationship from the inception at that spec point to it actually being a solid sale during construction, I think is paramount. And there are tools like ours that can do that.
I think maybe if I add then a slightly more because I'm no marketeer, but I'll add a slightly more layman's approach to the question. I've sort of coincidentally having a conversation with our marketing manager recently, and he was talking about storytelling. And the example goes that any manufacturer worth their salt should always be producing case studies of the projects they've been involved in. But just a case study of the project we've been involved in for our market, which is heavily decarbonising at the moment, heavily about energy efficiency, because of the products that we're supplying and the solutions that we're providing into that market space. It's now about, the question is, what was the problem? What was the issue? What was the pain point that they had in the first place? And how did we as a manufacturer, we as a solution provider, how did we solve that? So the actual product in the middle is obviously critically important to the project, but much less important to the story that we're talking about, because we're answering the question of what was the ROI on the project, or what was the energy efficiency increases that were seen because of it. That storytelling behind that, in my layman's marketing terms, is hugely important, and I think will be going into 2025.
I think one last thing that we're seeing a lot of at the moment is the growth of influencer marketing within the sector as well. There are large numbers of influencers coming through across lots of different product types, and you can usually find somebody that will be talking about a particular topic that you can relate your products or services to, etc. And that's something that can be really used to great effect as a support mechanism for PR or thought leadership, whatever, and product launch, whatever you're looking to do, but using those influencers within the marketplace. And they have grown quite significantly in recent years to on the back of the consumer influencers.
Yeah, thank you. So the next question we've got is about channels. So what marketing channels should construction product manufacturers focus on in 2025?
Can cover digital. I feel like I've already touched on LinkedIn, and obviously I've said my bit on Microsoft, so I'm not on commission by I feel like I was plugging Microsoft quite a lot as untapped. But I think just relating back to the marketing mix that Lee and Liam have already talked about, a lot of people, when they think of like Google or Microsoft, it's very bottom of the funnel, and something that we wanted to do with MBS, and I think is good practice for all marketers really, is thinking not just about people who've got a problem, they've already know they've got a need, and then they're going to Google, how do we get in front of them before they realize they have a need, or they might have an inkling but they haven't started to research that solution yet. And Google's full suite of materials and ad formats, such as display and demand gen and LinkedIn are really designed to get in front of people before they realize they have a need. Yes, you're at the beck and call of the audience targeting options, but again, if you've got like a bank of email addresses to upload, you can utilize that. Demand gen just launched the kind of lookalike similar to audiences to boost that further, to expand that reach. But I think utilizing LinkedIn as a way to amplify that thought leadership, really position yourself as an expert in that field and owner in that space is a good way to, again, secure that trust that we've been talking about. But you can promote that using across display, which is mobile, desktop, tablet, and then on demand gen, which is appearing in people's Gmail promotions tab, in Google Discover. So when you open a new Chrome tab, you've got like your personalized news feed. That's, the sponsored messaging in there, YouTube Shorts. So I know when we're talking about the marketing mix and trying not to spread ourselves too thinly, but there's actually so many ad formats available within the Google space, not just search, that I think people focus too much on the really competitive bottom of the funnel, where everybody's like at purchase stage, really, like that's where you get brand bidding and all that sort of nonsense. But if you do look further up the funnel, there's an opportunity for more space, more clarity. And just going back to the previous question about how to stay competitive and how do you really know what your competitors are saying. There's a free tool called the Google Transparency Center. So just Google it. You can put in any domain and then any market, and it kicks back every single ad that your competitors are running. So I use that for my clients to say, oh, are they using display? Are they using demand gen? Are they using shopping? Are they using search? To really understand the breadth of ad formats, also the messaging. So if competitors have got are putting their accreditations in there, turnaround times, if they're an e-com site, integrations, anything like that, that's where you really sell the USPs. But at least if you use the Ads Transparency Center, it gives you a good footing to say, well, if this is what the competitors are doing, how can we 2.0 that?
You've touched upon quite a few different things there. One of the things we've done a lot this year is going at the more thought leadership piece, like using Google Display. That's worked really well for us this year, as well as doing even some paid search adverts that are about downloading our reports. That's worked really well, like our building safety White Act. I feel like that paper, that was a really good example of where we were like, right, let's think outside the box a bit. We know people are searching for obviously information about the Building Safety Act. How can we make sure that we're appearing in the right places? We'd got this amazing white paper that we'd launched earlier in the year. We knew there was a massive interest in even just MBS's platform with relation to it. We had hosted a webinar at the beginning of the year and we had over 4,000 people sign up to it. So that was in February. We knew the interest was there. So it was how do we get in front of them? And it is looking at what content you've got and then looking at how we can kind of tweak it and change it for the different channels. So yeah, I feel like that's been quite an eye-opener this year because we've seen such success from going through using our thought leadership in a place where normally it is about, booking a demo, which you can get, it has its place and it's really useful. But yeah, it's been exciting seeing the thought leadership stuff take off this year.
I think there's a phrase, isn't there? Zag when others zig. Is it BBH the agency? I'm probably ripping off some famous 80s ad man there, aren't I? But it stands true that what you were saying there, Hannah, and finding channels that reach the right audience but others might not be looking at. You need to have a degree of novelty in here to get people's attention. So finding different digital channels that are right for your audience, and your audience could vary widely just within this what some people would see as narrow sector we're talking about here. But to give you an example, direct mail, physical direct mail, coming up with something interesting to send to people, to engage with them, to rip off another ad man, Rory Sutherland's notion of costly signalling, sending something out that actually is of value, the perceived value then of your brand and your product increases. So finding ways to do things like that as a wraparound around the intent-based, the demand-based activity that you need to be doing is really, really important. And that loops back to understanding your customer properly, but also doing some homework on what your competitors are up to. A bit of old-fashioned snooping online and finding out what they're doing should give you some examples of where you might be able to zag rather than zig.
I like that.
I think coming back to what we were talking about a bit ago about intent and things like that, an element, this much more focusing on prospect businesses using account-based marketing, which isn't really a channel, but it's a group of channels, and you can mix those to however you want to reach your particular audience, or ABM Lite, just taking it down a level. And being able to focus on the personas that you have within those target audiences, but also ensuring that you're going out much more brand awareness based to that wider buying committee, and utilizing a range of different channels to make sure that you're in front of those audiences when they're making purchasing decisions, and making sure that you're focusing on the businesses you think are going to be interested in what you do, rather than just a broad hit to the marketplace. I think it's really important to have that focusing, and making sure that you're going after the right prospects.
Izzy, I think just slightly off tangent from the sort of platform side of things, CPD is probably something people need to think about as well. And it goes back to that solving a problem for somebody. The legislation, particularly around building safety and sustainability at the moment, is changing so rapidly around everybody, that any professional that has to do CPD to remain, whether they're a chartered architect or if it's a different profession that they've got to do CPD on, is going to be looking for people that can educate them on these new compliance areas. And the manufacturers are by far the best place to educate on that, because they've got to make the products that comply to it. They know how it should be installed, etc. So, yeah, look for those on point, I think, topics and deliver those, because you will find that the uptake of them will be higher than something that you might have just usually gone and delivered a pitch against.
You'll find quite often in larger architects practices and the big D&B contractors, there'll be departments for professional development, standards, technical skills, this kind of thing that would welcome with open arms this kind of CPD information, and even perhaps lunch and learns and that kind of thing too. So it's worth a bit of homework there on some of those bigger target customers to see if there's someone whose job it actually is to talk to about these kind of things.
I think I'll jump in there if I may, just quickly, because there's quite a good example of what you're referring to. So one of the products that we provide is part of a life safety system as part of the smoke ventilation system within high-rise buildings, as an example. Now, we've fairly recently, should we say, over the last 18 months or so, put together a brand new CPD that's responding to the fallout of Grenfell. It's responding to the Building Safety Act. And the uptake on that has been phenomenal from people that are very, very keen to upskill themselves on an area that's absolutely critical. And because of the principal designer role that's around now, that these people are very, very keen to be proactive about upskilling themselves, is what I'm trying to say. So actually, I completely agree with you, Lee and Matt, absolutely right. You just, if you find the right platforms to put these CPDs on. And the critical part, actually, I will say, and this is kudos to our marketing team, if you create really engaging content, not boring, drab old CPDs from back in the day, they have to be engaging and interesting, and people are very, very willing to listen to you. It's quite key that you get that right, I think. But you're right. Essentially, what I'm trying to say is I completely agree with you. CPDs are not old hat. They are still very, very relevant and very engaging for particularly the architectural consultancy type world.
Yeah, especially think for 2024, so at the beginning of the year, at the start of Jan, the ARB, the Architects Registration Board, they made it mandatory for all registered architects to complete CPD. So it was like before, it was very much focused on REBA members have to complete 35 hours of CPD, but now there is a requirement for all registered architects to be doing a level of like a number of hours of CPD. So I feel like it really has opened the market, and also it's kind of reaffirming how important it is that architect specifiers, they need to be staying up to date and they need to be completing their CPD. RIBA also implemented more rigorous check-in processes to ensure that those 35 hours are being adhered to. So it is, definitely a space that has got a lot of focus, especially for 2024, and you can only see that obviously continuing on into 2025 and beyond. I think COVID was really interesting with CPD in that era of us moving on, having to move online. CPD moved online, but it was actually from our surveys that we had for quite a number of years before, specifiers had been asking for online CPDs regularly in our survey feedback, but there was a lack of interest from manufacturers in order to do that. Our results from our survey at the beginning of this year was that actually there obviously over the sort of COVID period, there was more interest in online CPD, but now we've seen a kind of an interesting change where people expect there to be an online CPD, but they do also want to do more in-person CPDs, but they do want both. So I think for a manufacturer, somebody part of the RIBA CPD providers network, you're going to target more people by offering both, and you're going to target people in a different way. So like a CPD online, you could target up to 300 people, whereas obviously you only target a smaller number of people when you go into a practice. But you're kind of getting different things from it. And I really think it's now looking at how you can offer it to people who want to just engage online versus those people who want to do it in person, or they want to do a bit of both. So I think CPD also great for your brand awareness, and it actually relates to what you was talking about earlier about Nick, about storytelling. You can use your CPD to tell your story in a really effective way that people want to listen to. And actually, the more you bring it to life with case studies and with things that you've done and make it interesting, people are going to resonate more with you and more with your brand. So when you're coming to that, the decision-making process of which brand do they go with, they know that, XYZ was really helpful, or I got some information from them, so I could maybe go back. It's a really interesting sort of brand awareness piece that follows through to the purchase or the specification as well.
I'll just jump back in there, Izzy. I think it's picking up on CPDs because it's part of my daily role as well. It comes back to that somebody's pain point within the process. So the point I'm trying to make here is that if they're a multi-office company across the UK, as an example, then perhaps they do want to set up a big online and in-person CPD, and they want to have lunch and they want to make a big deal out of it because they need to claim points. That's fine. You need to position yourself to enable that to happen. But equally, if somebody wants to jump on a CPD for an hour lunch, get their points and walk away, I think as manufacturers, we've got to be open to that's the service, that's the value add that we are bringing now to the table. We are an advisory role as opposed to simply a supplier now. I strongly believe that. So I'm agreeing with you again. We need to have both formats, and with one but not the other, I think it's going to fall short.
And just to plug our fabulous new platform that we launched at the end of September. So we've got a brand new ribacpd.com. So if you haven't checked it out, I definitely would advise having a look at it. You can then see how other manufacturers, if you're not already on the network, you can see how other manufacturers are presenting their CPDs, and just that it's a much better user experience now for specifiers, making it much easier for them to find the CPD they're looking for. And you also will see that there's a massive bank of online CPDs. That's something we've been working really closely with our RIBA CPD providers to get that message across, that we need more online CPDs available for people to access. And that can be live, but also could do it on demand. We've set up a form so people have to, or we've gate kept it so you as a manufacturer would still see who's actually viewed your CPD, which I think is a great way of getting some passive leads on content that you've already created. One of the things I did want to touch on channels was events. We've sort of touched upon a little bit, but events landscapes obviously changed massively. Have anybody got sort of any particular thoughts on what they would be doing for 2025 in the event space, or whether recommending using that channel for product manufacturers?
We've got a client, Polypipe Building Services. The project's up for a construction marketing award actually in a few weeks, I feel obliged to say. I'm not going to promote myself any further. And they got out there and ran events, small based, very targeted around the audience, so engineering specifiers and also architects, getting people hands-on with the product, because there was some uncertainty in the market around, well, it's a plastic product, is it replacing metal in a water supply system? What kind of implications are there? So actually getting out there and inviting people to try this product themselves, and to have the technical guys there to give that wraparound support around, well, this is how you design it. This is the broad level of support we've got around EPDs and broader sustainability, safety issues too, worked fantastically well. So I think while there might be some question marks, over the larger scale trade events, maybe I know that some have succeeded, some haven't. A focus on in-person events where relevant, especially if you've got a physical product that you can demonstrate to people, I think is tremendously valuable still.
I think if I play the other side then, to reflect on that, Matt, I would argue as a manufacturer that particularly as an SME, I think that's really keen because our marketing budgets aren't as big as some of these big corporates. That's really relevant to this conversation. I also think as well that you have to have something to say. So just being there year in, year out, I think back in the day it was, oh yes, it's this show now in July, we're going to go there. We've been there for the last 10 years. We need to be there. We can't not be there. Well, actually, I would argue, I think that landscape is changing. The event space is changing, and there's still a place for it. It's something that I participate in, fairly frequently as well myself. Where attending as opposed to exhibiting. But I think they look slightly different now. I think it's about pre-arranged meetings. I think it's about really strategic meetings with those that you want or need to meet. And if you are going to exhibit, I think you have to have something to say, whether that's a new product launch or whether that's, a bit of supporting software to go with your product, whatever that might be. But just turning up to have a presence, I think probably disappeared before COVID in truth. And that event space is definitely changing for sure.
Thank you. Yeah, we've definitely our approach to these exhibitions is to go to put kind of focus on one or two and just go big on it, making sure your stand is really impressive and that you've got your best sales team there and your messaging is on point and that you can really use the stand to actually demonstrate what you do. We're obviously a tech platform, and the way we designed our stand this year was that when somebody came over, it told the story of what we did very quickly. And also actually, like I had a couple of conversations, so the people that were demoing on stations were actually all busy, but we were able to use our stand to still kind of demo and showcase what we did, which was quite effective. So I think it is going there, going bold, and kind of pinning your hat on it a bit. Whereas I think going back to stuff we've talked about before, which is if you do spread yourself too thinly, you can't then go quite big on things. And you can kind of get a little bit lost in the sea of noise because there is a lot, especially some of the events that you go to, there is a lot of stands. So you do need to stand out. Cool.
I think there's also as well, there's just thinking as we're talking, and there's another element to it as well. It's not just the exhibition, it's not just the pre-arranged meetings, it's not just the chance encounters. Actually, the seminar sessions, I would add, the seminar sessions at some of these exhibitions are really, really valuable. And again, it comes down to CPD and the points that people are taking away from that. I'll mention the fire safety event. That's a really good example where actually that is a industry specific event that's adding real value to that community, I would argue. So again, it's different than it was before, but really high value. But you don't need to be there exhibiting every single time necessarily.
So moving on to our next question, which is about short term versus long term. So how can construction manufacturers balance brand building with lead generation to ensure long-term growth while meeting short-term business goals? Anybody want to go first on that one?
I can jump in on that. I mean, it is about that long-term versus short-term, and you can. An interesting piece is a document by Field and Binet who talk about the effectiveness of a digital era. Some call it the long and the short of it, and it's all about long-term branding combined with short-term lead generation activities delivering the best ROI. And of course, it's especially the case with construction because of our long lead times. Things take a long time to get purchased, so you have to maintain your brand awareness and the trust within the brand, but you also have to pick up along the way that lead generation activity as well. So combining the brand with demand generation and ensuring that's working together. And there's a recent piece just come out a couple of weeks ago. There's B2B Marketing Awards, and they've analysed all of their entries and these shortlisted entries. And what they found from that is the integrated brand and demand marketing activities have an average of about 35 to 1 ROI, compared to the other activities where they were in just brand or just demand generation. So getting the right balance is absolutely essential. You know, you have to do both. The long term, that is so important, especially when there is a sluggish marketplace, because you know it's going to be 6 months, it's going to be 12 months down the line. You still need to make sure that trust is in your brand. And whilst, as Hannah said, whilst you know still you've got the search at the bottom end, you know you still have to have that there, and you still have to pick up what's coming through from there. But just making sure that you've got the right blend across those channels.
I think tracking is really important here as well. I know we've touched on tracking before, but then it's like it's the big question mark of great, I can spend some money on brand building, I can spend some money on lead generation. How do I quantify the results from that? And like you said before, Liam, you know, the rise of cookies and how tricky it is to really understand this click led to this action across multiple devices and multiple touch points of the website, if you know that's where your information's stored, because we know that with such a long decision making process, it isn't one click, one purchase, one visit, one purchase. It's multiple months of research before you get specified. So I think, and you know, GA4, I'm going to say, has you know come under a lot of flack, and I know a lot of marketers may be using different attribution models. But one of the benefits of GA4 coming in is the improved attribution. So if anyone that hasn't been into it before, go and have a peek at your conversion paths report in GA4, and that'll tell you across all your marketing channels. Hopefully, you're using UTMs on them as well. It'll tell you which channels are leading to like the first click around obviously the research stage, and then which channels and which campaigns are driving that get in touch, book a demo, white paper download. And being able to look at that full journey over after like having gathering 6 months of data, let's not be too hasty. Google will tell you how long the purchase, like the path to purchase, where it is a download or if it's a book a demo, how long that takes, and then the multiple touch points involved in that. Because I think when marketers say, yeah, we can throw everything at the wall and see what sticks, but if we don't know, how do we measure what's working and what's not? So I'd say, yes, use the conversion paths report. If you're running ads already, you can use the click assisted and view through conversions columns. So view through is more for display in YouTube and demand gen. So you can say this, and you can track it down to this person saw an ad and then later took an action. And then with click assisted, it's someone clicked on this ad and then later took an action. So it doesn't necessarily need to be within the same session, but using those metrics, you can get a broader picture of the customer journey, and not be too hasty to pull back on brand when it's not providing the direct ROI. But like Liam said, it is necessary for long-term growth.
Customer journey is key there, isn't it? I think that's the key word, and taking a step back and making sure you've got a very clear idea of how that process is working. And it's very rarely a linear funnel. People are going to come in and out and might spend a lot more time in one bit than another bit, but at least planning it out in terms of notional phases gives you a structure to understand, okay, well, if someone's out of market, what tactics are we using? How are we measuring that? How are we looking to try and get people to the next phase? Although in construction, it's often not a case of getting them out to market in. They'll be in market when they're ready. So when they are, how do we then capture them and move them further down? But just having that, it can be quite a simple diagram with maybe 4 or 5 stages, and sometimes we plan in the Reba planner work in there for some of the later stages. It just helps to translate it into a format that's right for the industry, and then plot out problem solution and what tactics you're looking to use and what channels you're looking to use across those to get the objectives you want. But having that underpinning plan across right from the start of brand all the way through to demand and repurchase is the key fundamental for me there.
We created a marketing specification cycle, and we did it a number of years ago, and it's based around the REBA plan of works. Like a lot of the activity we do is based around the REBA plan of works to sort of explain where different platforms fit in. But this one was specifically about marketing, and like what you just sort of referred to there, Matt. The idea was to sort of show the different tactics, not just like the platforms that MBS has and the REBA CPD providers network. It was just, you know, in general, when you're looking at like getting something specified, these are the different like channels and tactics that you need to think about. And that's going from, your brand through to actually how do you get something over the line, like more demand gen focus. So
yes,
we will be sharing that in our follow-up email, because we've just rebranded it and relaunched it, so that fits in quite nicely. That was our last question. So I just want to say a big thank you to our panelists. Really appreciate your time and talking through and sharing your expertise with us. So thank you to everyone attending. If you want to find out more about MBS platforms and our marketing services and how they can drive your plans in 2025, then please do get in touch. And we'll also, if our panelists are happy, we can share details in the follow-up of some of the assets that we've talked about, but also details from our panelists if you were interested in getting in touch with them. But thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.
thank you.
Cheers.